right, I'd like to welcome this month's passenger profile, an old friend of mine who's been very, very successful in the sync world, Mr. Paul Otten. Welcome, Paul. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Michael.
So, Paul hasn't been a member for a long time, but I decided to interview him for passenger profile because um, he's had a unique career and has done really well. And I hope that other musicians are inspired by the things you've done and can learn that there is a path for people who are willing to work hard at it. And so let's start at the beginning, which is
Yeah,
your background in Ohio. You did you grow up in Ohio in
I
Cincinnati?
did. I grew up in Cincinnati, yeah, a little town called Reading.
Okay, and
Yeah.
you were for many years in a cover band, a wedding band, and it's
Yeah,
funny that people I don't think realize that you can be extremely successful and it can be very lucrative. You formed it with your brother, right?
it was just me and my brother.
Oh, okay.
Basically, it grew out of uh, we just played as a duo at this local college called Miami of Ohio, Miami University, and we had a friend who ran a bar there, little dive bar, your classic college dive bar, and we started playing every Friday there. And the weddings grew out of graduates from that college because we
Wow.
started getting tons of people that would just see us all the time. And so it just kind of it came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, these kids graduated and they started getting married. And then we'd play their weddings. And then word of mouth got around and we played weddings. And so we just started playing 40 to 50 a year for
Incredible.
about 10 years or more straight. Yeah.
And I remember at the time you were telling me that it was really lucrative. You don't have to, give me a number, but I don't think people, I mean, obviously every town of 100,000 people or more probably has one or two good wedding bands, and oftentimes they're fairly large because they need a lot of players to cover different parts on different covers that they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, but you guys, just two of you doing it,
Yeah.
you don't have to split the money eight ways, which was probably nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I developed playing bass with my left hand. So I got a sampler kind of thing that had bass on it. So I split the keyboard, or I'd find a keyboard that had a good split with a bass and piano, and so I'd play. I started with guitar, and then I just started playing piano mainly, so we could have some bass guitar in the tracks, and or not in the tracks, but in the songs that we sang. So yeah, it
and
just kind of
did you guys grow up in a musical family, or did you discover music on your own?
yeah, just on my own. I was always into it, and yeah, my brother and I went in on a drum set when we were like 14, 15 years old. And we
Was
used to
that
just,
that the year your parents asked you to get your own apartment?
yeah, right. Yeah, we had it set up. We had a little house and in the basement. We had two bedrooms set up down there and we had the drum set. And we'd both take turns playing Zeppelin or Rush. And then eventually it was kind of like, all right, I'm going to teach myself guitar so we can jam a little bit, not just like beat the drums all night long. So I taught myself guitar when I was about 16 or 17 years old, and I actually started writing songs right away. Um, and then when I place little sandwich shop I worked at, the guy that worked there with me was in a band and heard my stuff, and they were doing covers and originals, and he asked me to join. They lost a couple members, and so I played my first gig in April of 1990. So I was just turned 18, and at a bar slash laundromat in Cincinnati. So
Classic.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So I kept writing from there, and we wrote. And interesting is I joined Taxi with a couple of those guys from that band in the '90s. Uh, we went to Indianapolis to see you speak in like 1997
oh,
or
I
8.
remember that gig. I can literally like shut my eyes and remember the look of the building outside and all that
Yeah.
stuff.
But it wasn't for film and TV. That wasn't a thought. It was mainly to sell songs or something, to write songs. And my writing partner and I were going to write country songs.
Ah,
And that
okay.
just never really came about. But so I had been a Taxi member on and off, and I kept seeing the renewals come in the mail back when we got snail mail. And I'd renew, and then after a while I didn't. So it wasn't until 2010 maybe when I rejoined and was serious about it. So
Wow. So you never really had the aspiration to be a rock star so much as a songwriter?
yeah, I mean, maybe when I was a kid, when I first started playing guitar and stuff, maybe I had those aspirations. In the 90s, I had two different bands, and we had a full-on original band in the mid 90s. Uh, but it's just we traveled a little bit, but I don't think any of us really had the get up and go to take it on the road fully. I
Yeah.
don't know why. We were still young, but yeah, just things worked out the way they did, and then my brother and I started playing and it became lucrative what we were doing, kind of locally. So, that kept us from going after our rock star aspirations, I guess.
It's funny, you and Matt Vanderboot. Do you know Matt or know of him?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, both of you guys wanted to be country writers, which I'm sure now you're keenly aware. Maybe at the time you became keenly aware that there at any moment in time. Ralph Murphy once said to me, at any moment in time, there are 9,000 people living in the city limits of Nashville that have had a top 10 charted song, and they're trying to get cuts. And he was saying that
Yeah.
not as a put down to people who didn't live and breathe the air in Nashville, but just to exemplify how hard it was. Did you have any success pitching your country stuff, or when you look back at it now, you're like, "Oh my God, I thought that was good."
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty much that. I think we got the few that we did pitch, I think the comments were, it sounded too Mellencampish or, too Americana and not countryish. So too Midwestern.
Okay, well, you are, and Americana is kind of when I first met you. If I had to pin down a genre that I would have guessed you were in, Americana would have loosely been that genre. Although that genre
Loosely.
is often ill-defined and hard to define.
It
Um,
is.
so you rejoined Taxi at some point. Was your intent at that point to still keep pitching songs to artists or to go after film and TV?
Go after film and TV. Yeah. So my gigging life was getting a little long in the tooth.
Yeah.
I was reaching my 40s, heading towards my 40s, and I had people around me asking, are you just going to be in this cover band forever? And and we hit the economic slowdown in around 2010, and that affected gigs as well. And I was just looking for next steps. And I remember, I think it was 2009, I watched Matt Hurt's series of interviews with you,
Hmm.
where he was talking about licensing. And I was like, you know what, if I don't start now, I know it's not going to be immediate, but if I don't start now, 5 years down the road, I'm going to be like, why didn't I start then? So, it was looking ahead kind of a thing. If I start now and just start cranking out songs towards this, I can learn more, and then eventually maybe this can be my next step in music. So, luckily for me, I lucked into a lot of things right off the bat and met some publishers, and yeah.
I remember, I won't mention his name, but a particular publisher uh, called me up one day after we forwarded one of your things to him. Who is this guy? Where is he? Yeah, just like a million questions about you. And I said, well, I know him a little bit. And he was just blown away by you, which everybody was. And like almost every time you got a forward, I'm guessing that you probably got a phone call. And the stuff you were doing at the time wasn't any particular style so much as it was just you and loosely in that Americana vein. Um,
Yeah.
I would say that you've got a very identifiable voice. It depends which Paul Otten persona is kind of singing the song. Certainly, when you, I don't even know if you wouldn't call it falsetto, but you've got a particular style where I'll be watching a TV show and go, oh crap, there's Paul. I could recognize you in a heartbeat. So once you started early in that time period getting these calls from publishers, did they ever try to like mold you into something, or they just literally fell in love with what you were doing and found that you were very licensable?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, falling in love is maybe a strong word, but yeah, they liked what I was doing, what I was handing over to them, and so that particular publisher you're talking about, like, started sending me a lot of briefs and then expanding them a little bit more because at the time I think it was pretty much Americana, but a lot of pop rock too.
Hmm.
I think I was in that, and then it evolved into you know kind of Lumineers styles uh, of Monsters and Men, the other bands in that genre, uh, and then blues rock came, the Black Keys style stuff, and um, I somehow fell into that, and I started doing just loads of blues rock, and so that's where my different voice came in.
And
Uh,
it's worth noting that both of those styles, it was very fortunate for you that those styles came into fashion because they were on the fringe of what you were naturally doing. So I'm guessing
yeah,
it wasn't a stretch. I was going to ask you about, well, how did you learn different genres and have to adapt? But really, they were pretty close to home base for you.
yeah, yeah. It was pretty easy to get jump into those. So yeah, um, yeah. And at the start, I thought I'd go off and do some orchestral stuff or
Wow.
things like that, and yeah, I didn't have that. I don't have the background, first of all, in symphonic music. So I think you need that to really pull it off. If you're going to go for something that's like big time trailer music or something like that, I know there's lots of Taxi members, Matt Hurt, Adonis, that do really well in that genre, but they have backgrounds, I think, that really, I mean, Helen tells me that all the time from my Big Little Lies part, because she's classically trained. She's like, well, I'll try to pull off a string part, you know, out of the box strings or something. She's like, nope, it's not falling the right way. So there's genres like that I was like, I need to stick to my strengths and like play a little bit of here and there with different genres that are still within my reach, but not go overboard, because if you try to do everything, you're just gonna spread yourself too thin and not put out quality, I think.
I think that's a point well taken, and I hope that other taxi members that watch this video hear that loud and clear because all of our successful members, every single one of them, when I've asked them, do you have any advice? They all say, play to your strengths. A lot of members will chase a dollar amount. If they see something come in for a $5,000 sync or a $40,000 TV commercial, they'll go, you know what? They think of the dollars. They don't think of this is not in my wheelhouse. And they end up coming up with something that they somehow convince themselves is really close and really awesome, and then get heartbroken when it doesn't get it forward. But anybody objective would listen to it and go, this is inauthentic to the genre. So,
Yeah, and I've veered into the kind of indie pop with a little electronic world, which is tough. That's a really tough genre because that changes, year by year, just the sounds that you use.
yeah.
Uh, they could be dated 6 months after you put it out, and so that's a tough one. But I've done a few of that. But yeah, that can be heartbreaking because you put out Helen and I put out a an album of that kind of stuff, and then 2 years later, I think our publishers are like, we can't pitch this stuff because it
Wow.
sounds too dated. You know?
Didn't age well. Honestly, indie pop, if somebody put a gun to my forehead and said, tell me what indie pop is in a sentence, I'd be a dead guy because it does change so much and so quickly. that you can't point to a band from 18 months ago and now they might be considered straight up pop versus indie pop. So
Yeah.
I don't understand that genre well.
Yeah, there was a few bands that stuck around with that for a little bit. Fun and
Yeah.
MGMT. Uh, and I'm sure there's more I'm missing out, but even they evolved, like changed their styles and things like that. But if you listen to their stuff, it sounds like the time they put it out.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot of people, a lot of taxi members, I'm sure this applies to people who aren't taxi members, they make music that sounds like the music they fell in love with when they fell in love with music. And they get stuck
Mm.
there, but it's because they've listened to so much of it. It by osmosis, it's just part of their musical soul. So, how do you when you have to learn a new genre, change a genre. For instance, I know that you will take on projects like where you may co-write or produce somebody like Casey Hurwitz, a longtime Taxi member, and you have to accommodate the style, their style versus your style. Um, what do you do to stay contemporary and modern sounding so that you can deliver something that doesn't sound like Paul Otten 5 years ago or 10 years ago or indie pop from 2014?
I mean, your listings, with Allahs, they call them, like, sounds likes, there's a bunch of YouTube videos attached because Helen's a member and we do a lot of co-writing still for Taxi. Those help because they are what, publishers or TV or music supervisors are looking for. And I've got publishers that send me briefs and stuff with videos attached of different genres. So, I just listen to them, just not study, but listen to them a fair bit and just kind of get what the vibe is, they're looking for.
Do you find that coming up with that more modern contemporary vibe is more about the sounds that are used, or could it be chord structures or keys or even melodies? The types of melodies, styles of melodies have certainly changed. Lyric delivery, the phrasing in lyric delivery, I think changed really dramatically in the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
Everything used to start like on the one,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then people start anticipating or delaying, when the vocal. So, which aspects do you think are the most prominent aspects that you have to listen for and adapt to when you try and create something that's quote unquote cutting edge
I would say the phrasing.
on the
Uh,
vocals?
yeah, vocal phrasing. I think instruments, when it comes down to it, I mean, at least the artists that I'm listening to, the instruments haven't changed unless you're in indie pop or something electronic. Those can change, although they still use a lot of 808s, things like that. Um, but I think in, the pop rock, folk rock, mainly folk rock kind of, or even, blues rock genres, those instruments styles don't really change. It's just more the phrasing, I think. There's a guy that's kind of on the rise called Noah Kahan,
Hmm.
and his phrasing is interesting to me because, I just wouldn't in the past have come up with something like that. I'm like, how does he think that way?
Yeah.
But, it's, he's a lot younger and, I think there's a element of hip hop. Listen to a lot of, which I didn't listen to a ton of hip hop growing up. Maybe rap music, but that was in the 80s. But I think hip hop changed a lot of the phrasing styles, and you hear that a lot of quicker phrasing, or it jumps in on an odd time, or yeah. So there are things like that that I try not to emulate, but to infiltrate my
Yeah, and
writing.
a lot of the lyrics, the word count in lyrics it has definitely gone down, and it's an idea that gets spit out versus maybe a story being told. And you are a great storyteller. I mean, your lyrics before you ever worked with Helen, and certainly the stuff you've done after meeting her. And we'll talk about Helen in a moment because we keep referring to Helen.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
for
right,
people that don't
right.
know,
Sorry.
Paul's in a band with another Taxi member that he actually met at a road rally meal. And we'll talk about that. But do you find yourself migrating to that punchier lyrics with lower word count, where the idea is the idea? The idea is to make the idea prevalent, like get out of this place, I'm going home, versus telling a story about how you got there. Or are you still able to stay relevant and on the cutting edge telling stories?
I mean, yeah, there's times when it's just I feel like less is going to be more lyrically. When I co-write with Helen or something, sometimes she'll have something that's really wordy, and sometimes it works, but a lot of times, I mean, we just did a song recently where I pretty much kept the melody the same, but I chopped the lyrics in half basically out of each verse. Um, I think it worked. Uh, Yeah, and that's not always 100% going to happen where, you make things really sparse, but it works for a lot of genres. So I think stories can be told using less, but I think it's, whatever you're feeling for the song. I mean, if you're working with a brief from a publisher and they want something that way, and every reference you get, song reference, is that way, then obviously you want to go in that style. But as far as an artist goes, I think however way you want to tell a story, you should do it. So whether that's loads of lyrics, I can't speak to that for somebody that wants to work that way. So
You're well known in the taxi community, and certainly me coming from a production background early, very quickly when I started to get to know you and hear your music, I was like, wow, this guy really gets production. And it's obviously not just production for your stuff, which is, somebody who writes a movie script can also be a great director because they've got a deeper vision and connection to the storyline and the characters and such. Well, the same could be said for musicians that are singing their own stuff, but you are able, in a chameleon like way, to adapt your production style to what they want their music to sound like. And I'm sure that there's discussion with them before you start. It's like, that's a little dated. How about if we modernized it by doing this? How did you develop those production chops?
reps. I worked with a Cincinnati musician named Brian Lovely. I did recorded an album in the early aughts, they call them, around 2003.
Which,
Uh,
of course, was spawned by your last name, Otten.
yeah, right, right. Yeah, so I would go to his house, and he had a little studio in his basement, and he had produced a lot of local artists in Cincinnati, and so I did a whole album with him, and I don't know, kind of observing what he was doing because I wasn't doing any production at that point. I think I had a 4-track cassette recorder still. That was about it. Um, and then I think that helped a little bit knowing what to do and how to manage digital recording. And then I think it was just reps. Just I started with GarageBand. I had a Mac when I started on Taxi, and I recorded some of the early stuff on just GarageBand. Moved up to Logic. Didn't read the manual because it was too much. I'm still learning stuff on Logic, but I just started doing it and found that I kind of had an ear for it, which I didn't know. Didn't going into it, I didn't know that I had an ear for it. Uh, but I think it was just doing it constantly, uh, over and over, that kind of developed, and just listening. I always listen to music. Uh, uh, Not tons of variety of genre, but a fair amount, and just knowing what I like to hear and just trying to reproduce that in my own stuff. Um,
You've also through the years, I mean, there have definitely been times where I've heard stuff that you've done, and if I have to sit there and go, wow, how did he do that? I can't even tell for sure what instrument. It could be like a snare drum with a towel thrown over it or whatever you're doing, stuff that's unusual, not typical in the box stuff where it's just like
Right.
your sound choices sound like everybody else choices. You will take an interesting sound and use it on a part that other people might do on an acoustic guitar doing, whole note open chord strums, and maybe you do it with another instrument. So I think that makes your sound unique. You're giving people something they're used to eating. In other words, if people love, you're not just giving them lasagna with meat, you're giving them lasagna that instead of meat maybe has a layer of spinach in it or something. So it's still lasagna, but it's got a little different flavor. How did those ideas for instrument choices pop into your head?
I don't know. I think I just, I grew up on the Beatles, and obviously they did nothing but experiment in the studio. So maybe it comes from that, but that's one of the things that keeps me interested in recording is trying to find different sounds. And then that's evolved into making my own samples of house whatever I have around here. I make samples of whatever I want to use. That way I can reproduce that for another track if I want to, which I don't always, but yeah, I just like to experiment and try to get something a little different instead of just the same, cranking out the same old stuff. Even within my own songs that I'm writing or co-writing, like the next album or something I do, I want some kind of different approach. So usually that comes from it's some kind of different instrumentation or a variation on that instrumentation. So
During your writing process, do you ever hear, literally when it's just you, the acoustic guitar, and you're sketching out a vocal idea and a melody and it's really brand new, um, do you hear sounds and production styles at that stage? And you're kind of, you know, like when you look at a photograph or a painting that's got perspective, like you're going down a road, does the vision start to form from a production and instrument choice and sound style as you're writing, or do you finish writing and then go, okay, what should I do with this?
I think it's in there as I'm coming up with an idea. Yeah. I think I think there's some kind of idea of where I want to take it. It may not end up that way, but there is I think my wheels are spinning as far as how what am I gonna make this sound like? What's the end product gonna be? So yeah, I think that's always going on. Yeah, that's why I wake up so early because I get ideas spinning in my head
What
in
time
the
do you get up?
morning. Today I get up at 5:30
So that's another
a.m.
thing that's good, that's
I usually
common.
get up around 6 a.m. every
Uh,
day.
Almost all of our successful members have that in common. I know a couple of members that get up at 4:30 in the morning, and they're having their coffee and working on something easily by 5 a.m. down in the basement so that they can get 2 hours worth of work in before the family comes down for their post toasties or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, that's interesting. And I'm looking at the acoustic guitar over your left shoulder back there. Um,
Yeah.
and do you have, because your guitar sounds are always great. I've never heard anything you've done. Acoustic guitar and drums are my forte as an engineer, I would say. So I notice those things a lot in other people's work. Never once have I listened to anything that I've heard you do at any point, in your arc as an artist where I went, oh, that was kind of a weird choice for the acoustic guitar. I'm usually thinking, go, Paul. Man, I wouldn't have thought of that guitar sound. Do you have a typical go-to mic for acoustic guitar and a go-to starting point, for compression or EQ or
My mic's changed. I got an old AKG. I've just started re-implementing that.
what
For a
kind?
while, I was like, that's a little too bright.
A
I have a
414?
two. It is. I don't even know. I'm looking at. I'm sorry, I'm off camera.
That's okay.
Says I don't even know. It's. I'd try to pull it out, but I'd have to unplug it and everything. It's just a standard AKG. It says it on there, and my eyes are so bad I can't read. But I have a tube mic that I got. It's a Russian-made tube mic, Aventone, which
Wow,
I've
I've
used.
never used one.
Yeah, it's red, and as it was sold, apparently at the time when I bought it, like it was Taylor Swift's vocal mic of choice. That thing picks up a lot of sounds, a lot of noise. Like it's very yeah, it's live. I've got SM7 for vocals, uh, but for guitars, I've been using AKG. I've got uh, a little Shure pencil mic, and uh, that one works pretty well. But I like to play around with different mics too. Uh, Sometimes I'll use the SM7 for a mic for a guitar. Uh, you really got to pump up the gain on those, but
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was still actively working in the studio when the SM7s came out, and I remember the Bee Gees were under the roof at Criteria working on maybe it was Saturday Night Fever. Everybody was trying the SM7s because somebody somewhere in the league of professional engineers went, "Oh yeah, SM7s, man, they're the shiz." And everybody's using it, but my God, you had to turn the preamp gain up to like, 3 o'clock, 3/4 to get any signal. So I know nowadays I see them everywhere on podcasts.
Mhm.
I think most people wouldn't know the difference between a mic that sounded pretty good and a mic that sounds amazing. I think that they just use it because it's the thing to use. And
It
I
doesn't
wonder,
pick up a lot of extra noise.
they do or do not?
It does not.
Right, because of the
I
low
can
gain.
I can have my window open in my studio and record a vocal, and it's not picking up a lot of noise.
Wow. And do you use a cloud lifter or anything or just crank the input?
Just crank the input until I don't override it, but
Right.
yeah, it does take a lot of. I have it pretty much dialed in, but it does take a lot of gain. Yeah.
They came out with a USB baby SM7 for podcasting, and they sent one to me. I don't know, probably 5 years ago or something. And it's funny, I've tried to use on Taxi TV. It's got something that's never happened with any other mic. The signal only shows up on the right side. I don't know why. It's not a stereo microphone. Maybe there's something wrong in the wiring, but all this to say the right side sounds really good. So Shure
Yeah.
has definitely figured out what sounds good, what the EQ curve in a microphone is that sounds best on voices, most voices. And
Yeah. 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 I don't have money for a Neumann or anything like that, but I can grab mine. Let me grab mine. Yeah, this is the Shure. It is 137 I've used
oh
quite a bit.
wow, I've never used one of those. I don't think I've even seen one of those.
Sure.
Is
And
it
that's the tube mic,
that's the
Aventone.
Russian one?
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
it
So that
hear
one,
everything that goes on in your house? Is there like a little Russian spy guy in there?
I think so. I think so. Yeah. It's got a box, power box. You got to hook it up to. And
Nice.
it, yeah, I mean, it's a true tube mic. But it's just whatever I'm into at the time, I guess to use. But I have this old classical guitar, which actually I started learning on when I was 16.
Nice.
My aunt gave it to me, and it's like a Cortez. I think it's from like the late 60s, early 70s. But I've actually recently restrung it with just acoustic strings.
Yeah.
It's got a nice woody, deep sound to it. So I was curious of uh, how it would play with just steel strings on it, and it's not too bad. It's yeah. So I like to mess with things like that. Yeah, for different
Um,
sound.
do you use mostly plugins or do you have any actual physical outboard?
No, I mean I've got a little mixer here, but mainly it's just plug it. It's just straight into the box. Like I don't have a guitar amp. I use the
Wow.
amps in the box. Uh, I was supposed to have a guitar amp, a Vox, because Helen Austin and I won the John Lennon thing
Right.
song contest in 2015, and I got a couple guitars out of it. I was supposed to get a Vox amp, and that never showed up. But the the amps, guitar amps that are in the box in Logic at least is what I
Yeah.
use, and they're fantastic. So I don't have to worry about trying to mic an amp and things like that. So yeah, there's quite a bit that I use it in the box. Yeah, so I don't have a huge studio setup with a big mixing board and things like that.
What do you use for monitors?
I've got Samsons. I've been using those for years. When I first started, I just had little Sony stereo speakers from a home stereo system. That was my monitor system until I could afford to buy real monitors. But yeah, I had a local Cincinnati guy that produced a lot of stuff. He'd get so mad if you were doing that on what? Yeah,
Hey,
so
whatever works. I've got a pair of Bose, like I don't know, $300 a pair of speakers that would go on either side of your laptop, for home listening stuff. Certainly not to use in the studio context. They sound great. Um,
yeah,
so, the other day I was doing something, shooting some video for Taxi, and I needed my desktop microphone, which is that, to be closer to my voice to match some other voice that was in context. And I normally have the mic about 18 inches from my face when I'm doing stuff like this or Taxi
yeah,
TV. In that case, I moved it about 6 inches from my face. And when I listened back to the video, I went, damn, I've used some of the greatest mics in the world, like Neumann U67 tube mics. I've had the privilege of my career to have access to just incredible mics. This thing, for being a $120 microphone, USB no less, sounds great. When I heard it back, I went, that sounds as good as any 80 Neumann U87 I've ever used. So you don't know, it's
yeah.
just whatever works.
Whatever works. Yeah,
Do
especially
you,
within a budget.
yeah,
Obviously, most of us that are doing this with our home studios don't have endless budgets to buy, $6,000 microphones or
but
whatnot.
a lot of people think that you do need stuff and that you should spend a lot in the studio. And they have in my opinion, misguided belief that the more money I spend on gear, the greater chance I have of getting stuff licensed. I would contend that you could use a $120 microphone, a mid-level, laptop, and probably even headphones to monitor on and still get stuff licensed. It's about the song and the vibe and the production and the style far more than
Yeah,
the gear.
yeah. I mean, I work a lot in headphones. I mean, getting up at 5:30, 6 in the morning. My stepdaughter's living with us for now, and then my wife. So I can't have my speakers cranking until about 9 a.m., 10 a.m.
Right.
Uh, and I have a mobile studio. My wife's from Minneapolis, and she has family there that we see a lot. So we'll make the drive there, and I set up a mobile studio in her parents' house, and I don't tote around studio speakers with me, so I just use headphones, so and it tends to work. I mean, it is nice to get out of those headphones and listen to it through speakers, but yeah, you just kind of work with what you got.